You keep asking, if they want me so badly, why don't they reach out? But here's the truth. People don't always act on what they crave. They act on what they're ready for. And just because someone feels something for you doesn't mean they're capable of showing up for you. So stop confusing silence with mystery. It's not mystery, it's your clarity, and clarity is power. There's something profoundly frustrating about feeling like you're being thought of, missed, maybe even wanted, but seeing absolutely no movement. It's that sense you get deep down when you know someone is thinking about you, maybe even watching your stories, orbiting your life silently but never actually reaching out. That quiet absence speaks louder than any words, and the worst part is how easy it is to internalize it, to turn it into a story about you. Maybe it's something you did. Maybe it's how you looked last time. Maybe you weren't enough. That kind of thinking can mess with your self-esteem faster than any harsh words ever could. But let's pause right there, because something essential needs to be said. Just because someone desires you, just because they feel something real or raw or deep, doesn't mean they're in a place to do something about it. Desire is not action, craving is not love, and wanting you isn't the same as choosing you. People confuse emotional longing with emotional readiness all the time. Just because someone feels pulled toward you doesn't mean they're equipped to walk that path. They may sit with their feelings, they may dream, they may play out 100 fantasies in their head about what could be, but none of that matters in your life unless it turns into something you can actually feel, unless it becomes effort, intention, commitment, and far too many people get stuck in that no man's land between what they feel and what they're willing to follow through on. But here's the trap. When you know you're being missed, when you know you've left a mark, there's a temptation to wait, to hold out hope. Because if someone's thinking about you, surely that means they'll come around eventually, right? Surely that means they'll text, call, apologize, show up. So you start reading into silence, you start filling in blanks. You start making sense of nothing because you want to believe there's something. And when that nothing continues, it doesn't just hurt, it confuses. Because it seems illogical. How can someone feel so much and still do so little? How can someone care and still be absent? You assume that if someone's craving you, they'd fight for you. That craving should create action. But that's the dangerous part of romantic idealism. It makes us think emotion alone should be enough. Think about it. How many times have you felt something for someone but didn't act on it? How many times have you wanted to fix something, reconnect, express something, but didn't? Not because the emotion wasn't there, but because you were scared. You were stuck. You were tired. You convinced yourself the timing wasn't right. You told yourself that maybe it was too late, or maybe you just wanted to feel something without having to deal with it. This isn't about blaming anyone. This is about waking up to reality. And the reality is this. Feeling something is not hard. What's hard is turning that feeling into effort. What's hard is facing your fear, facing your ego, facing another person with honesty and clarity and saying, I want this. I'm willing to work for it. So when someone stays silent, even if they're craving you, even if their heart beats faster when they see your photo, even if they replay the last conversation in their mind 1,000 times, that craving still exists only in them. It's not your responsibility to reach in and drag it into the light. It's not your job to carry someone's potential. It's not your role to chase ghosts because they once gave you warmth. And here's what no one tells you. Even when someone feels something deeply for you, they may still prioritize their comfort, their distractions, their self-protection. Because feelings don't always win. Sometimes fear wins, sometimes pride wins, sometimes people simply aren't willing to rise to the challenge their own heart is asking them to face. And that is not a reflection of your value. That's a reflection of their own limitations. You can be the most radiant, loving, understanding human being, and someone can still fail to show up for you. You can be everything they secretly want, and they can still do nothing. Because desire without courage is useless. Because love without effort is a wish. It doesn't feed your soul. It doesn't build a life. It doesn't give you the partnership you're craving in return. So what happens when you internalize someone else's silence? You shrink. You start questioning your intuition. You start giving more than you're getting just to maintain the illusion that something might still be there. But illusions are dangerous. They cost time, energy, confidence, and they keep you emotionally hooked on someone who isn't emotionally available. Let go of the idea that being desired is the goal. Desire is easy. People desire others every day. What matters is who acts on it, who chooses you, who communicates, who steps through their fear and makes their intentions known. That's what real connection looks like, not hidden longing or mysterious silence that leaves you guessing. Stop waiting for someone to prove their desire in silence. Pay attention to what they do, not what you hope they feel. Let your standard be effort, not intensity. Let it be presence, not potential. If they want you, they'll come forward. If they don't, their silence isn't something to decode. It's a message. It's data. It's clarity. Your worth is not on hold, waiting for someone else to catch up to it. You are not less lovable because someone lacks the courage or clarity to meet you where you are. That silence, it's not a void for you to fill. It's a boundary. It's the end of their story and the beginning of yours. Not because the feeling wasn't real, but because you finally realized real love shows up. There's a reason some people go quiet when they feel something real. It's not because the feeling isn't strong, it's because it's too strong. The truth is, emotion has layers. Underneath what looks like distance is often a war between desire and vulnerability. Wanting something deeply can be terrifying, especially when the stakes feel high, when there's something to lose, when the person in front of you isn't just another option, but someone who actually matters. Fear walks in. It doesn't whisper, it screams. It says things like, what if I'm not good enough? What if I open up and they don't feel the same? What if I get close and mess it up? This fear isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's hidden under casual indifference, under delayed replies, under excuses about being busy. But beneath that, there's often a trembling kind of hesitation, a fear of being seen too clearly, of being judged, of failing to live up to the expectations imagined in someone else's eyes. Opening up, being vulnerable, choosing intimacy, it all demands courage. It requires someone to step into uncertainty without any guarantee. It means allowing another person to see parts of you you're not even sure you've fully accepted yet. And for many, that's too much. Vulnerability has been misread for weakness for so long that even the most emotionally intelligent people struggle to sit in it without shame. They hide. They mask it with ego, with silence, with space. But it's not that they don't feel something. It's that they don't know how to feel it and be okay at the same time. Think about how many times vulnerability has been punished in someone's past. Maybe they opened up once and were rejected. Maybe they trusted the wrong person. Maybe they were told growing up that expressing emotion was too much or dramatic. So what starts as a moment of connection quickly becomes a danger zone. Feelings become threats. And instead of leaning in, they retreat. They protect themselves, not just from the risk of loss, but from the risk of feeling unworthy. That silence, that lack of communication, it's often a shield, not always a conscious one, but a powerful one. And while it can feel personal, while it can feel like it's about something you did or didn't do, it's not always rooted in the present. Sometimes people are responding to ghosts, to stories written years before you ever showed up. They're not avoiding you, they're avoiding what you represent. Vulnerability, intimacy, the possibility of being truly known, and possibly not being enough. It's easier to stay in fantasy, in longing, in daydreams, because in fantasy nothing can go wrong. Nobody leaves, nobody gets rejected, nobody disappoints. But real connection isn't fantasy. Real connection asks for participation, for courage, for honesty. And when that kind of honesty feels too risky, silence feels safer. Silence becomes a strategy to keep control. There's also a part of the human brain that seeks consistency more than happiness. If someone is used to emotional distance, to being let down, to never really having their needs met, then closeness actually feels uncomfortable. It feels foreign, even if it's what they say they want. So they pull away, not because they don't feel drawn to someone, but because closeness threatens the narrative they've lived with for years. And that narrative often says, I'm better off alone, or no one stays, or I'll just ruin it anyway. This is why longing doesn't always translate into action. There's a tug of war inside people that no one else sees. A push and pull between wanting love and fearing the weight of it, between wanting to be known and fearing exposure, between craving connection and believing they're unworthy of it. And unless that war gets resolved internally, nothing external can break through. No kindness, no patience, no love. Because vulnerability has to be a choice. not something pulled out of someone. It's hard not to take it personally when someone steps back just as you feel something building, but that withdrawal isn't always a rejection of you, it's a rejection of discomfort. And the irony is, the more someone feels, the more likely they are to feel threatened by those feelings. Intense emotions stir up old wounds. They make people question their sense of control. And when you've built a life around keeping things at arm's length, that sudden closeness doesn't feel like home. It feels like danger. And yet, the world tells you that if someone wants something enough, they'll go after it. That if they're not reaching out, they must not care. That if they're not showing up, they're just not that into you. But it's not always that simple. People are more complex than clean-cut rules. Emotions don't always lead to bravery. Sometimes they lead to shutdown. And if someone doesn't have the emotional tools to handle what they're feeling, the feeling itself becomes the problem. So then the question becomes, how long do you wait for someone to figure it out? How long do you interpret silence as fear instead of indifference? The key is understanding that fear doesn't excuse absence, it explains it, but it doesn't justify leaving someone else in emotional limbo. No matter how real the inner struggle, connection still requires choice. It requires stepping up even when it's hard. And if that choice isn't being made, it's not your job to drag someone through their own fear. Your presence isn't meant to prove anything to anyone. You don't need to convince someone that you're safe, that you're not going to hurt them, that you're worthy of being let in. That's not yours to fix, that's theirs to face. And while compassion is beautiful, it should never come at the cost of your emotional clarity. Silence can come from deep fear, yes, but even fear needs to be faced if love is going to thrive. Vulnerability isn't a liability. It's the birthplace of trust, of intimacy, of real connection. If someone isn't ready to lean into it, it's not because you're too much. It's because they haven't yet made peace with being seen. And until they do, no amount of patience or love can take them across that emotional bridge. That journey is internal. It's personal. And the only thing you can control is your response to it. Not whether someone feels something, but whether they're ready to honor what they feel. And if they aren't, then silence is all the clarity you need. There is a quiet pressure that comes with being strong, a kind of weight that's rarely acknowledged but always felt, especially in romantic situations. It's the pressure of being perceived as confident, collected, composed, of being the one who seems to have their life together, the one who knows what they want, speaks with clarity, walks with purpose. On the surface, it looks like an advantage, and in many ways it is. But there's something else it creates too. Something nobody talks about. It creates distance. That distance isn't always chosen. Sometimes it's the byproduct of how people interpret strength. The more grounded, independent, and self-aware you are, the more others can start to imagine you as untouchable. Not because you are, but because you carry yourself in a way that makes people question whether they could ever match your energy, whether they could ever be enough for someone like you. It's easy to assume that people pull away because of disinterest. But sometimes, the opposite is true. Sometimes people don't come closer because they've already built a story in their head. And in that story, they've already lost. They've already told themselves they can't live up to the image they've created of you. They admire your glow but fear your standards. They want your attention but assume they can't hold it. They see your value and immediately compare it to everything they're unsure of in themselves, and so they freeze. That pause, that hesitation, isn't always rejection. It's intimidation. Not in the dramatic sense, more in the quiet, subtle way that self-doubt tends to show up. It sounds like, they probably have better options, or they wouldn't take me seriously anyway, or I'm just not on their level. These thoughts don't always get said out loud. Sometimes they live just under the surface, affecting every decision, every word, every movement or lack of movement. Being admired from afar is flattering until it becomes isolating, until you realize that the very things you've worked so hard to build, your self-worth, your independence, your emotional intelligence, are now the reason someone feels too small to step forward. The pedestal people place others on doesn't just elevate, it separates. It creates a space between who someone actually is and who others believe them to be. And in that space, action dies. People freeze in their tracks because they don't feel like they could ever reach high enough to meet what they think is expected of them. But that's the problem. These expectations are rarely real. They're projections. Most people don't actually want perfection from someone else. They want presence, authenticity, connection. But when insecurity is running the show, even something healthy can feel like a threat. A strong, centered presence can make someone overly aware of where they're not strong, of what they haven't healed, of what they still fear. And instead of saying, here's someone who inspires me to rise, the mind says, here's someone who will eventually see through me. People who aren't grounded in their own work often anticipate being found out. They fear being discovered, not in the positive, romantic way, but in the way that means being seen as not enough. And that fear is paralyzing, so it's safer to step back, safer to admire silently, safer to convince themselves that they wouldn't be chosen anyway, not because of anything you did, but because of what they assume they'd reveal if they got too close. It's hard to hear that sometimes silence doesn't mean a lack of desire. It means someone has already counted themselves out. They've already decided the answer would be no, that they'd disappoint you, that they couldn't give you what they imagine you expect. And in that fear, they choose distance over the risk of exposure. But here's what matters most. That distance isn't yours to cross. It's not your job to shrink yourself to make someone else feel more capable. It's not your role to tone down your strength so someone else can feel comfortable enough to show up. The right connection doesn't ask you to dim your light. It meets you where you are, and it rises with you. Trying to manage someone else's perception of you is a losing game. No matter how warm, kind, or open you are, someone who's already convinced themselves they're not enough will find a reason to stay away. It won't matter how gently you speak, how available you are, how patient or understanding you become. If they feel fundamentally unworthy, they'll find proof in your strength, not comfort. That's not a flaw in you, that's a filter in them. Strength is often mistaken for perfection, and perfection scares people. It makes them assume there's no room for messiness, no space for flaws, no allowance for human complexity. But the truth is, strength isn't about being perfect. It's about knowing who you are in spite of your imperfections. It's about holding your ground while still being open. And while that's beautiful, not everyone knows how to receive it. Not everyone believes they're capable of meeting it. This is where clarity becomes everything. You can't control how others see you. You can't rewrite the stories they tell themselves. What you can do is continue to stand in your authenticity, to recognize that intimidation is often just a mirror reflecting someone's insecurities back at them, and that their silence, hesitation, or retreat is often less about your energy and more about their lack of preparation to meet it. People have to feel safe within themselves before they can feel safe with someone else. If they're still battling the voice that says they're not enough, even the kindest presence can feel like pressure. Not because of anything it does wrong, but because it challenges the narrative that says, stay small, don't try, you'll only get hurt. Until that voice gets quiet, no amount of openness from you can make someone feel ready. And the truth is, you shouldn't have to manage someone else's readiness. Your job is to be fully unapologetically yourself, to continue growing, evolving, and loving in a way that feels aligned with your truth. The right energy will not shrink from that. The right energy won't see your strength as a spotlight exposing their flaws. It will see it as an invitation to step into their own. The admiration you inspire in others may be quiet, but it's real. And if it ever turns into hesitation, know that it's not a reflection of what's wrong with you. It's a reflection of how powerful you show up. Some people aren't scared of the connection. They're scared of what it would ask them to become. And until they're ready to face that, they'll keep their distance. Not because you're too much, but because they haven't yet learned how to be enough for themselves. There comes a moment when waiting starts to feel heavier than moving on. Not because the feeling disappears, but because the silence becomes louder than the connection ever was. It's the moment when you stop looking at your phone, expecting something, anything, and start realizing that your life is still happening, even in the absence of what you hoped would show up. And in that moment, there's a quiet truth that rises to the surface. No matter how deeply someone might feel for you, if they're not showing up, it's easy to romanticize potential, easy to convince yourself that there's something real happening behind the scenes just because you sense emotion. You start to attach to small signals. A memory, an old message, a glance. You replay moments like they hold secret codes that might explain everything, but the truth is, longing without action is just fantasy. You can't build a life on what someone might do. You can't invest your energy in possibilities while reality starves. That kind of emotional waiting drains you in ways you don't notice at first. You start second-guessing yourself. You keep the door open, just in case. You compare everyone else to a version of something that never really took form. You start editing yourself. Your choices, your availability, your priorities, all to make space for something that isn't making space for you. And that's when it becomes a problem. That's when desire becomes a trap. The hardest thing to accept is that someone can want you and still not reach out. They can care and still stay away. Because wanting is not the same as choosing. Choosing requires clarity, effort, courage. It means stepping up, even when it's uncomfortable. And if someone isn't doing that, it's not your job to figure out why. Your job is to pay attention to what's actually happening. It's tempting to lower your standard in the name of empathy. To say, well, maybe they're going through something, or maybe they're scared, and maybe they are. But empathy shouldn't cost you your peace. Compassion doesn't mean staying emotionally loyal to someone who isn't even present. You can acknowledge someone's struggle without putting your life on hold for it. Because the truth is, when you stop accepting crumbs, you make room for real connection. You stop trying to interpret silence as a sign and you start using it as data. You stop chasing validation and start becoming your own source of clarity. And in that shift, everything changes. The power comes back, not in a cold or guarded way, but in the way that says, I don't need you to choose me for me to know I'm worthy of being chosen. You've probably been taught that love requires patience, that if you wait long enough, people will come around, that the right person will find their way back. But that kind of thinking ignores something essential. You are also allowed to have a timeline. You are allowed to want effort now. You are allowed to want communication now. You are allowed to want someone who doesn't need time to figure out if you matter. Raising your standard doesn't mean demanding perfection. It means asking for presence, honesty, intention. It means expecting actions to match words and feelings to match behavior. It's not about playing games or being harsh. It's about protecting your emotional energy. Because your heart is not a waiting room, your time is not an audition stage, and your love is not a test someone needs to pass when they finally get their life together. The right person doesn't hesitate to let you know where you stand. They don't hide behind vague signals. They don't disappear and expect you to keep the door open. They show up, not always perfectly, but consistently. And that consistency is not a luxury. It's the baseline for anything real. You're not asking for too much by wanting effort. You're not being dramatic by wanting clarity. You're being honest about what love actually looks like when it's healthy. There's a difference between being open and being available for confusion. One builds connection, the other builds anxiety, and anxiety is not love. That constant questioning, that emotional limbo, that's not romantic tension. That's emotional depletion. And you don't need to sit in that space just to prove you're understanding or loyal. You can let go of the question, even if you never got the answer. You can decide that silence is an answer in itself, and that it tells you more about where someone is than any confession ever could. Choosing yourself isn't a dramatic move. It's a quiet decision you make over and over again. When you stop replaying conversations that didn't end the way you wanted, when you resist the urge to check their profile one more time, when you catch yourself fantasizing about what they might be thinking and gently remind yourself, it doesn't matter if they're not acting on it. Love asks for more than longing. It asks for courage, presence, willingness. If those things aren't on the table, you're not obligated to keep showing up for someone who's not showing up for you, not because you're cold, but because you're clear, because you've worked too hard to become this version of yourself. To go back to waiting for someone to decide if they're ready for you. Clarity doesn't always come from big moments. Sometimes it comes from the absence of them, from what doesn't happen, from who doesn't call, from who stays quiet no matter how loudly the connection once felt. And when you start listening to that, when you stop trying to explain it away, you free yourself. You get to reclaim your attention, your effort, your energy, and place it where it's reciprocated. You are not hard to love. You are not too much. You are not intimidating. You are not the reason someone didn't step up. If someone couldn't meet you where you are, That says everything about their readiness and nothing about your worth. Choosing yourself is not an act of bitterness. It's the beginning of alignment, the beginning of peace. You don't need to wait to be chosen. You already are, by yourself, by your values, by your standards. And the moment you stop settling for craving without commitment, silence without action, presence without consistency, you begin to attract something better, not because you begged for it, but because you stopped accepting anything less.